Assalamu alaikum. Today I'll be walking you through my process to make an animated logo like the one that you see on screen completely for free. I'll walk you through the entire process from start to finish and we'll have a look at the results at the end. Bismillah. The logo that I'll be animating is the one that's on screen right now. I had already designed it in advance using Krita, which is also free software that you can get online. I styled it based on some Arabic letters for a new project that I'm working on, which you can find out more about via the link on the screen. Thinking of logo ideas is probably the most difficult part, so I guess I'll leave that up to you. For the actual animation, I'm going to be using some free and open source software called the Wick editor. You can use it on the web or you can download it as I'm doing on screen. Once it's finished downloading, you'll run the installer and the app will be installed onto your computer. The reason I picked the Wick editor is because it's one of the simplest animation tools to use, as well as it being free. There's alternatives like all the Adobe stuff, but those will cost your kidney and an arm probably. So we'll just stick with what's simple and easy to use. I've made a new project, and once I've set up the UI to suit my preferences, I'm just going to change the aspect ratio of the canvas just so that it's a square so that I can use it in multiple different places. And I like to make sure that it has a bit of a high resolution just so it doesn't look pixely anywhere because it's not a vector based animation. I've set the frame rate to 24, which is a typical frame rate just so the animation looks smooth and doesn't look choppy. I've set the background to be purple for obvious reasons, and also just having solid color so that because the logo itself is white, I'll be able to see what I'm animating and what I'm doing. I later on found out that you can actually set the background to be transparent, which is even better. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put a black square in the background just so I can see what I'm animating easier. And then when I'm ready to export it, I will simply hide the layer and export the file. I've locked the layer as well, just so I don't accidentally move it while I'm trying to move other things. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a plan for what we're going to do for our animation. Sometimes this is referred to as an animatic, but it doesn't really matter. You might be confused as to what's going on at the bottom of the screen with the timeline, especially if you've never used any sort of animation or video editing software before. But just to keep it short and brief, I'm sure you can find a better tutorial somewhere else. But because a video is essentially a sequence of pictures that are just played really quickly in succession, the timeline is basically each of the individual pictures, also known as frames. For this animation, what I'm trying to do is I'm going to make a rectangle appear from the bottom, like a kind of pole, and this is going to split into two, uh, representing the base of the fur, a bit like a book. And then the dots are going to appear one after the other in some kind of glitchy kind of style. And then at the end, I'm going to replace it with the actual logo, just to make sure that the quality is the same. So hopefully when we're done, it will look a little something like this. Perhaps you might have noticed that on the last frames, the logo itself and our rendition of it didn't match up and they didn't align exactly, which made it look a bit off. So what we're going to do now is we're going to trace the actual logo itself using shapes so that we can animate them in the Wick editor to our liking. Because the shapes that we're using are white and the logo itself is also white, I've put a bit of a red outline just so I can tell when I've exactly traced the correct shape. And now we're ready to start on the first part of our actual animation. We want the pole to appear and stretch out to its full height. The big mistake that people will usually make at this point is that they will just consistently change the height of the pole, ignoring the fact that most motion doesn't look robotic and linear. As well as this, most of the time you want animations to look a bit lively and cartoony. And this is where we incorporate some things called the 12 principles of animation. You'll notice that my motion is not linear, but instead it follows a sort of pattern. This is an ease in and an ease out pattern, where the difference in height of the first few frames is quite small, and then it gradually gets larger, and it peaks, and then it starts to become small again. And this is where we get a natural looking growth rather than a robotic, linear, and static one. I often find myself, rather than tweaking my frames, I like to tweak my frame rate to see if I can experiment and find a smoother looking animation style. We're now moving on to the second part of our animation, which is after the pole has grown, it's now going to split into two, which are going to like represent the halves of a book. And the main thing that I want to highlight here is some more animation techniques based off, once again, the 12 principles of animation. When something falls, it's never a linear sort of motion. It's usually quite slow at the beginning, and then it builds up speed, and then when it hits into the ground, it slows down again, or rather it's forced to slow down because of the impact. Here we're going to have a sort of locking kind of mechanism, and we're going to implement a sort of bouncing as it gets to the bottom, and it locks in place. Unfortunately, I'm having to move the book downwards as I am going through the frames, because in the Wick editor, I don't think this is a feature. Maybe it is, and I just haven't found it. But in the Wick editor, you can't really set an anchor point. I mean, you can't really complain. I guess you get what you pay for, but it's a minor inconvenience. You might also be wondering what the grey things in the background are. This is referred to as onion skin. You can enable it from the toolbar, as I've just done a few times now. And what it does is it lets you see a few of the frames that are before the frame that you're on, and also a few of them that are afterwards. And you can choose how far back or how far forward you want to go. This is really, really useful, especially when you want to make sure that your motion is consistent. Especially at the beginning, for example, where every new frame, the pole was moving slightly. So when I wanted to make sure that it stayed like growing from the bottom, using the onion skins was very useful. And here is our progress so far. As we can see, we've got a nice eased growing pole, and it folds into the book pages quite nicely. I do feel like snapping feels like it's a bit off, but for some reason it looks okay when I zoom in, but when I zoom out, I I just feel somehow about it. But we'll move on anyhow to the last part of the animation, which is making the dots appear. I decided to deviate a bit from the plan, and I wanted to experiment with a different sort of animation, which is making the top dot sort of fly out of the book when it's opened. After trying and playing around a bit with this idea, I realized that I just wasn't a fan, so I went back to the original plan. I think I lost my footage, to be honest, when I was actually adding all the dots in, so you've just got some footage of me trying to add the glitch effect in at the end. The only important thing that you might have missed is that when adding this glitch effect, I tried to do something called animating on twos, which is where you're still using a frame rate of 24 frames per second or something, but for this portion of the animation, you're making each frame last 2 frames instead of just one to create a certain effect. Here, I wanted to use it to create the glitch effect, but this can be useful for anything that you're trying to do, to slow down motion or anything like that. And now we're ready to see the final result. I hope you found this video useful. I didn't really like the final result, but it is what it is. The sound effects, by the way, I got them for free from a website called pixabay.com, and they have lots of different sound effects, so you can probably find some for whatever project you're working on. And that's everything. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.